I'm afraid you are the sickest man in the United States. You have everything.
You mean I have Bloodlust?
Yes.
Bubbly dance?
Yes.
Hellfire?
A little bit, yes. You also have several diseases that have just been discovered in you.
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, how would you like to stuff yourself full of debuffs and turn into an offensive machine? Today is all about pushing the limits on a couple of fun skills in Sunbreak: Resuscitate and Coalescence. Resuscitate is a good buff that gives you a bunch of extra attack power when you are inflicted with an abnormal status, and Coalescence is a buff that gives you a bunch of attack, element, and status buildup for a short duration after an abnormal status is cleared from you. However, in normal use, obviously only one of these will be active at a time. After all, once a status is cleared to activate Coalescence, it won't be active anymore to keep Resuscitate up, right? Well, what if there was an exception to that? Like having multiple statuses on you. Not only an exception, but a way to keep both of these up nearly 100% of the time, while also filling yourself up with multiple other fight-affecting buffs. Well, there is, and guess what? It works for every weapon out there. Today I'll be showing it with the Sword and Shield as sort of a baseline, but you can do this with any weapon class in the game with minimal changes to the build at hand. And what's even cooler about this is it actually winds up being pretty strong too. It may be one hell of a strange gimmick, but that doesn't mean it isn't powerful once everything starts working together in tandem. Let's start out then by talking about every skill we are using towards this specific goal. Obviously we have Coalescence and Resuscitate, as I've already mentioned. Here's what our attack and affinity look like baseline before anything is active. With this we have 3 skills on as well that apply statuses to us and therefore activate both of these skills when they are on and off. The first of which is Bubbly Dance. This skill at rank 3 will apply minor bubble blight to you when you roll 3 times. This effect gives you the equivalent of Evade Window 2 and also a couple ranks of Constitution, making it pretty good for survivability purposes. After a certain period of time, it will drop off naturally, but you can easily reapply it by just rolling 3 times again. As well, we have Bloodlust, the skill from the Shagaru Magala armor. This skill applies Frenzy to you while you are fighting a monster, and while the virus is active, it will progressively drain your health, but also at rank 3, it will give you a sizable attack buff of plus 20, and the equivalent of Evade Window 3 while it is draining your health. Once you do enough damage to tick the debuff over into the finished state, the recovered state, it will fill your health bar completely and increase your affinity by 25%. When the debuff reaches this finished state, it will trigger Coalescence as well. Then we have all 4 ranks of Hellfire Cloak, which will apply the Hellfire status to us on repeat when a monster is enraged. If you leave this debuff on, you will activate Resuscitate, and if you clear it by rolling or dropping it on the floor, it will activate Coalescence, resetting the timer on this. On top of this, when dropped on the floor, it will deal damage to a monster when it comes in contact with it, and can even cause knockdowns when doing so. As a result, we have 3 different debuffs working in tandem to trigger these effects, and when Bloodlust is active, Bubbly Dance is active, Resuscitate is active, and Coalescence is active, your stats bump up from their original state here to this new number here. But it is quite a fun and unusual way to play and to reach these higher numbers. Technically speaking, you can of course reach most of the effectiveness of this without needing to use 3 separate debuff applying skills, which means that you can stick some more attack based skills in, but we like to have fun here, and so that's the point of this build. Stuff in as much as we physically can to affect this and see how good it can be. With that said, let's move on to the actual equipment that is used. As I mentioned before, we are using the Sword and Shield as an example, but this is applicable to pretty much all weapons. The talisman that we are using has 2 Bubbly Dance, a 3 slot, a 2 slot, a 1 slot, and also a rank of French Free just for fun. And the weapon you will use in general is the general raw meta weapon of the Kimura trees, especially as these come with a 4 slot and 2 slot for decorations. If your talisman instead has a 4 slot instead of a 3 slot, or if you manage to curio craft some Hellfire Cloak onto your armor itself, or in fact any of the other skills that we use decorations to achieve, you can instead upgrade the Scorned Magnamalo weapon tree, which tends to be just slightly better than the Kimura weapons, more than anything because it has blast on it rather than the numbers themselves. As well, if you really want to, most weapons can actually use the Lucent Nargacuga weapons to achieve this build too, for poison as a status while also having the same decoration slots available. That said, Coalescence also increases status buildup pretty dramatically, and so this actually works out quite nicely if you can use either of these weapons.
That works out great.
As a result, I'll be showing you you the Kimura weapon version of this build as far as putting it together, but just keep in mind that if you get either of these changes, you can just swap a decker around no problem and upgrade to a status-bearing weapon with a 3-slot and a 2-slot instead of a 4-slot and a 2-slot. That said, the augments that you want on your weapon, no matter what, are of course 1 attack augment and 1 affinity augment for +5 raw and +5% affinity together. The armor that we are using today is the Shagaru Magala head, chest, and legs, the Maklava arms, and then the Scorned Magnamalo waist. The Rampage decoration that goes into your weapon itself will be whatever anti-species decoration applies to the current monster that you are fighting, as nothing else can reach the 5% damage boost that this will give you within this build. The other decorations that you'll want in this set are 2 Hellfire Plus jewels, 3 Tenderizer jewels, 3 critical jewels, and 4 attack jewels. You'll also have a couple of 1 slots free to spare, and in these I recommend Spearbird's Call, and then also some stun resistance just to avoid nasty combos sending you home in a cart. With this, the full skill list that we have here is Attack Boost 4, Hellfire Cloak 4, Resuscitate 3, Crit Boost 3, Weakness Exploit 3, Bubbly Dance 3, Coalescence 3, Bloodlust 3, Critical Element 1, just as a random bonus, it doesn't really affect us, Razor Sharp 1, Spare Shot 1, Stun Resistance 1, Flinch Free 1, which is just a bonus from my talisman itself as I mentioned earlier, Leap of Faith 1, Mail of Hellfire 1, which increases your attack at the cost of some defense when in Red Scroll, and then Spearbird's Call. This all comes together to create an extremely synergistic build that can be dangerous at times, but also gives you the equivalent of Evade Window 5 when everything is active. It lowers your stamina usage costs, and also offers you a full heal whenever you transition the Frenzy buff into its finished recovered state. The math of it all is a tiny bit complicated, but I'll go through it anyways, of course, and just for the sake of it, I'll use the Scorned Magna SNS to show the increase that you get to status as well, as the rest of the numbers and skills don't change at all when doing so, it just gains blast. With augments applied, we have 335 raw, 33 blast, and 5% affinity on the weapon itself, as well as purple sharpness. So we have +7 attack for attack boost, +20 for resuscitate, which will always be active in this build, +18 for coalescence, which will nearly always be active in this build, and then Bloodlust we will count both values as half, with the expectation that half of your hunt will have frenzy as a debuff, and half of your hunt will have frenzy recovered as a buff. As a result of that, we are counting this as +10 attack for Bloodlust, then finally for additives we get +15 from level 1 Mail of Hellfire, which adds up to 393. Then we factor in our multiplication times 1.05 for attack boost, times 1.39 for purple sharpness, and then we have 55% affinity, up to 80% when frenzy is recovered. So we'll count half of that bonus for a total of 67.5% affinity with full crit boost, which is 1.27 times our average damage, making a total effective raw of 728.5, which is quite high considering all the evasive buffs that we get from these skills as well. Then let's dive into the status of it all. 33 blast +10 when frenzy is active, counted as a half bonus that is instead +5 for Bloodlust. Then when coalescence is active, we also get a 15% boost to our status buildup for a total blast number of 43. On top of all this, we of course have Hellfire Cloak active too, which adds extra damage pops throughout the fight, which are quite reliable if your weapon has a Silkbind attack that gives you movement, such as Shield Bash for the Sword and Shield, dropping the pool of Hellfire on the floor, and even also popping it if you are close enough to the monster when you use the attack. This isn't only damage, but also causes free knockdowns, which are of course just massive windows of free damage to use as well. So then let's talk about the exact plan for fighting a monster. Essentially, when you're on your way to the monster for the first time in a quest, you want to roll 3 times to activate Bubbly Dance. This will more than likely fall off just as you are about to arrive at the monster itself, then activating Coalescence. If you then roll again 3 times, Bubbly Dance will be active again and activate Resuscitate once more as well. When you approach the monster, you will get Frenzy debuff activating Bloodlust, and if you deal enough damage, you can turn this into the recovered Frenzy buff to reactivate Coalescence once again. As you are fighting, Bubbly Dance will most likely fall off as well, so try to keep this up for both Resuscitate uptime and for the evasive buffs that it gives you. But of course, whenever this does fall off naturally, it will reactivate the timer on Coalescence as well, so it's still a good thing when this happens. On top of this, whenever the monster is enraged, you will get Hellfire applied to you, also activating Resuscitate and then Coalescence when it is dropped off. If you use the Hellfire well, it will deal a bunch of extra damage and easily get you 2 or 3 extra knockdowns on a monster over the course of a full hunt. With all of this, you have the knowledge and the power to be a master of debuffs, taking that which should hurt you and instead turning it into your own weapon, an ally against the monsters.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! but not for me.
Use it and enjoy this crazy playstyle. With one last recommendation from me, use Gourmet Fish. It gives you a small amount of natural health recovery, which helps combat the health drain from Frenzy itself during the active stage, which, while not necessarily required, just makes the experience a little bit easier to experience. Aside of that, you now have all the tools that you need to turn the tides and make your pain into the pain of the monster instead. I hope you've enjoyed this strange but fun build, and I hope you have a good time if you do decide to mess around with it yourself. But even if you don't go all out on this full debuff build, I can highly recommend using bits and pieces of it to mess around with Resuscitate and Coalescence, as they are both extremely strong skills when used well. Like if you like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.